I'm pregnant. Aren't you happy? Mara stood in our kitchen doorway, backlit by the afternoon sun streaming through our suburban windows, holding a pregnancy test like it was a winning lottery ticket. Her smile was too wide, too rehearsed, like someone who'd just aced an audition for a toothpaste commercial. I should have been ecstatic. We'd been trying for 2 years, through fertility consultations and ovulation calendars, and the kind of scheduled intimacy that turns romance into a medical procedure, but something in her performance made my stomach twist. Of course I'm happy, I managed, setting down my coffee mug. When did you find out? This morning. I'm about 8 weeks along. She practically bounced on her toes. Can you believe it? Finally. 8 weeks. I did the math backward, counting days like a forensic accountant. Our anniversary trip to Mexico, the resort food that left me attached to an IV bag for 4 days while Mara explored Cancun alone. The conception window that didn't quite align with my recovery timeline. That's incredible, I said, because what else do you say when your wife announces she's carrying what might be your child? How are you feeling? Amazing. Tired, but amazing. She moved closer, wrapping her arms around my neck. Grant, we're going to be parents. Her perfume was different, expensive, unfamiliar. When had she started wearing something that cost more than our monthly grocery budget? We should celebrate, I said. Dinner at Romano's? Actually, I already made plans with Arielle. Sister bonding times, you know? She kissed my cheek, already pulling away. You don't mind, do you? I minded. I minded that she'd told her sister before telling me. I minded the new perfume and the rehearsed announcement and the way she couldn't quite meet my eyes when she talked about the timing. But I was Grant Solen, financial analyst and chronic overthinker. Maybe I was reading too much into what should have been the happiest moment of our marriage. Of course not, I lied. Tell Arielle I said congratulations on becoming an aunt. Mara was already grabbing her purse, checking her reflection in the hallway mirror. Oh, and Cedric called while you were in the shower. He wants to talk to you about something work-related. I told him you'd call back. Cedric Trasker, Mara's boss at Dataflow Solutions, where she analyzed market trends for a salary that barely covered her student loans. Cedric, who drove a BMW and wore suits that cost more than my monthly rent contribution. Cedric, who had taken a sudden interest in Mara's career development over the past 6 months. What does he want? Something about the pregnancy, I think. Maybe company benefits stuff? She shrugged, but her shoulders stayed tense. You know how generous he is with employee support. Generous. Right. In my 15 years of corporate experience, I'd never met a CEO who called employees' spouses personally about benefits. But Mara was already out the door, leaving me alone with my suspicions and a phone number I didn't want to dial. I called anyway. Grant, congratulations, my friend. Cedric's voice boomed through the phone like we were old college buddies instead of strangers who'd met twice at company parties. Mara told me the wonderful news. Thanks. She mentioned you wanted to discuss something. Absolutely. Listen, I know how expensive these things can be. Medical bills, nursery costs, all of it. Dataflow believes in supporting our family members through major life events. I waited for the catch. There's always a catch when someone leads with generosity. I'd like to cover everything, Cedric continued. Doctor visits, hospital delivery, nursery setup. Consider it a company investment in our future. That's very generous, but no buts, Grant. Mara is one of our most valuable team members. This is what we do for family. Family. The word hung in the air like smoke. Since when did mid-level data analysts qualify for executive-level benefits? Since when did bosses call husbands directly to offer 5-figure support packages? I appreciate the offer, but we can handle our own expenses. Of course you can. But why should you? This is what success looks like, Grant. Taking care of the people who matter. The people who matter. Not employees, not colleagues. People. I'll discuss it with Mara and get back to you. Perfect. And Grant, don't wait too long. These opportunities don't stay open forever. The line went quiet, leaving me with more questions than answers. I spent the next hour staring at our wedding photos, trying to remember when Mara's smiles had started looking like performances. When she came home that night, she was glowing with excitement about Arielle's reaction and baby names and nursery themes. She talked for an hour without asking what Cedric had wanted, which told me she already knew. He offered to pay for everything, I said finally. Isn't that amazing? I told you he was generous. Mara, bosses don't typically offer to fund their employees' pregnancies. This is unusual. Her face shifted, happiness replaced by something harder. Why can't you just be grateful? For once in your life, someone wants to help us, and you're looking for problems. I'm not looking for problems. I'm trying to understand why. why someone would be nice to us. Maybe because not everyone is as cynical as you are. The argument escalated from there, following familiar patterns of accusation and defense. But underneath the surface noise, I kept thinking about timelines and generous bosses and the way my wife's perfume smelled like someone else's money. That night, while Mara slept beside me, I did what any financial analyst would do when the numbers didn't add up. I started investigating. The next morning, I sat in my cubicle at Morrison & Associates, staring at a spreadsheet that should have contained quarterly projections but instead held a different kind of calculation. Conception dates, travel schedules, the 4-day window when I'd been too sick to leave our hotel bathroom, let alone participate in creating new life. "You look like someone stole your lunch money," Neil Martinez said, rolling his chair over from the neighboring cubicle. Neil had been my closest friend since college, the kind of guy who could read my moods like financial reports. "Mara's pregnant." "That's fantastic. Why do you look like you're planning a funeral?" I glanced around the office, making sure our conversation wouldn't travel to the wrong ears. "The timing doesn't work." "What do you mean?" I explained the Mexico trip, the food poisoning, the conception math that didn't align with biological reality. Neil listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious with each detail. "And her boss wants to pay for everything?" "Everything. Medical bills, nursery, hospital delivery. Says it's company policy." "For a data analyst?" "Grant, I've worked in corporate benefits for 8 years. That's not policy. That's personal." We sat in silence for a moment, surrounded by the ambient noise of keyboards and conference calls and normal people living normal lives. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the timing is off, but the baby is still mine. Maybe her boss really is just unusually generous." Neil gave me the look he'd perfected in college when I tried to rationalize bad decisions. "When has your instinct ever been wrong about financial irregularities?" "Never. In 15 years of analyzing market trends and corporate behavior, my pattern recognition had been nearly flawless. Companies that seemed too generous usually had hidden motives. People who offered unsolicited help usually wanted something in return. But this wasn't a corporate merger or a suspicious earnings report. This was my marriage. I spent the rest of the day researching prenatal paternity testing. The technology had advanced significantly. Non-invasive tests that could determine paternity as early as 8 weeks using only maternal samples. No risk to the pregnancy, no need for Mara's knowledge or consent. The ethical implications made my chest tight, but the alternative was living with uncertainty for the next 7 months. I'd rather be wrong and apologetic than right and unprepared. That evening, Mara announced she'd scheduled her first prenatal appointment for the following week. "Dr. Patterson comes highly recommended," she said, stirring pasta sauce with unusual enthusiasm. "Cedric's wife used him for both her pregnancies." "Cedric's wife recommended him?" "June. She's lovely, very sophisticated. She said Dr. Patterson handles all the executive families." Executive families, as if pregnancy was a corporate perk that came with stock options and company cars. "How did you meet June?" "At the office Christmas party, remember? We talked about restaurants and vacation spots. She's been so supportive about the pregnancy." I remember June Calrin from the party. Elegant, sharp-eyed, the kind of woman who noticed everything and forgot nothing. She'd barely acknowledged my existence, but she'd spent considerable time talking to Mara about topics that seemed oddly personal for a boss's wife. "That's nice of her." "She invited me to lunch next week. Says she wants to share pregnancy tips and doctor recommendations." More generosity from the Trasker family. More unsolicited support from people who barely knew us. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. After dinner, while Mara took a bath, I called the genetic testing laboratory I'd researched. The process was simpler than I expected. A sample collected during routine prenatal care, materials sent to their facility, results available within 10 business days. "We'll need the father's DNA sample as well," the technician explained. "A cheek swab will work." "And this is completely confidential?" "Absolutely. Results go only to the person who ordered the test." I scheduled the appointment for the day after Mara's prenatal visit, giving me access to her medical information and test samples. The deception felt unbearable, but the alternative was far worse. The next morning, Mara left for work wearing a dress I'd never seen before. Designer quality, probably worth more than her weekly salary. When I mentioned it, she said Arielle had bought it as a pregnancy gift. Arielle, who worked as a barista and lived in a studio apartment, buying designer maternity wear for her sister. Another piece of the puzzle that didn't fit the financial picture. I spent the day analyzing the situation like a corporate investigation. Mara's new clothes, expensive perfume, and sudden social connections with executive families. Cedric's unusual generosity and personal involvement in our pregnancy. The timing discrepancy that placed conception during my illness. The evidence pointed toward a conclusion I didn't want to reach, but financial analysts don't get paid to ignore uncomfortable data. That evening, I found Mara on the couch, scrolling through baby furniture websites on her laptop. The prices made me wince, cribs that cost more than our monthly mortgage, strollers that rivaled luxury cars. "These are beautiful," she said, showing me a nursery set that would require a second mortgage. Cedric said not to worry about budget constraints. "Mara, we need to talk about this arrangement with your boss." Her fingers stopped moving on the trackpad. "What about it?" "It's unusual for employers to offer this level of personal support. I'm concerned about the implications." "What implications? That someone wants to help us?" "That someone might expect something in return." She closed the laptop with more force than necessary. "You're being paranoid." "Am I? When was the last time you heard about a CEO personally funding an employee's pregnancy? When was the last time you tried to be grateful instead of suspicious?" The conversation followed the same pattern as before. My questions met with deflection, my concerns dismissed as paranoia. But this time, I noticed something new in Mara's responses. A rehearsed quality, as if she'd practiced these answers. "I'm going to bed," she said finally. "Some of us have early meetings tomorrow." Early meetings. Mara's schedule had become increasingly unpredictable over the past few months, filled with client dinners and weekend conferences and business trips that seemed unusually frequent for a data analyst position. I stayed up late that night, researching Cedric Trasker and data flow solutions. The company was successful, but not extraordinarily so. Mid-tier consulting with decent profit margins, but nothing that would justify executive-level employee benefits. Cedric's personal profile was more interesting. Married to June for 15 years, 2 children in private school, houses in Connecticut and the Hamptons. A man accustomed to getting what he wanted, with the resources to make it happen, the kind of man who might view other people's marriages as obstacles rather than boundaries. Mara's prenatal appointment fell on a Tuesday morning that felt like walking toward an execution. I drove her to Dr. Patterson's office, making small talk about baby names and nursery colors, while my stomach churned with anticipation. The medical building was in the expensive part of town, all marble floors and abstract art that screamed, "We cater to people with premium insurance." Dr. Patterson's waiting room looked like a luxury hotel lobby, complete with fresh orchids and magazines that cost more than most people's lunch. "This is beautiful," Mara said, settling into a leather chair that probably cost more than our couch. June was right about Dr. Patterson's practice. June again. The woman seemed to have opinions about every aspect of Mara's pregnancy, from doctors to restaurants to maternity fashion. For someone we barely knew, she'd become remarkably invested in our family planning. Dr. Patterson was exactly what I'd expected. Silver-haired, confident, the kind of physician who charged consultation fees that required payment plans. He treated Mara like visiting royalty, discussing her pregnancy with the attention usually reserved for high-risk cases or celebrity patients. "Mrs. Solen, I understand congratulations are in order," he said, reviewing her chart with theatrical precision. "Mrs. Calren spoke very highly of you." "June has been so helpful," Mara replied. "She recommended you specifically." "June has excellent taste in medical care. We'll take exceptional care of you and your baby." The appointment proceeded with routine efficiency. Weight, measurements, questions about symptoms, and family history. When Dr. Patterson mentioned the standard battery of prenatal tests, I saw my opportunity. "What about genetic screening?" I asked. "We want to be thorough." "Of course. We recommend comprehensive testing for all our patients. Lab analyses, genetic panels, the full spectrum of prenatal care." "Perfect." Mara's samples would be collected today, giving me access to the genetic material I needed for paternity testing. After the appointment, I walked Mara to her car and watched her drive toward data flow solutions. Then I returned to Dr. Patterson's office and had a conversation that felt like betraying everything I'd promised about marriage and trust. "I need to arrange additional testing," I told the receptionist. "Paternity confirmation, confidential." She handed me forms without judgment. Apparently, this wasn't her first experience with suspicious husbands and questionable timelines. The process was disturbingly simple. Authorization for genetic testing using samples already collected, results delivered to my address within 10 business days. I spent those 10 days living in parallel realities. In one, I was an expectant father preparing for the happiest chapter of our marriage. In the other, I was a man gathering evidence for the end of everything I'd believed about my life. Mara seemed oblivious to my internal turmoil, chattering about baby preparations and nursery themes with infectious enthusiasm. Cedric's generosity had removed all financial constraints from her planning. She ordered furniture and clothes and equipment with the casual confidence of someone spending someone else's money. Cedric suggested we register at Bloomingdale's, she said one evening, scrolling through luxury baby gear on her laptop. He says their selection is superior to the usual stores. How would he know about baby gear selection? He has 2 children, Grant. He's been through this before. With his own wife, not with his employees. The conversation ended there, but I noticed Mara's increasing irritation with my questions about Cedric's involvement. What had once been grateful acceptance was becoming defensive protection of their arrangement. On day 9, I couldn't concentrate on work. Neil found me staring at my computer screen without actually seeing the spreadsheet displayed there. Results come back yet? Tomorrow, probably. What's your gut telling you? That I'm about to learn something I don't want to know. And if you're right, then I figure out what comes next. The envelope arrived on day 10, delivered by courier to my office address. Plain white paper, no identifying marks except the laboratory logo and my name typed in standard business font. I stared at it for 20 minutes before opening it, knowing that the information inside would change everything regardless of what it said. If the baby was mine, I'd spend the rest of my life wondering why I doubted my wife. If it wasn't, I'd spend the rest of my life figuring out how to respond to the betrayal. The results were clinical and definitive. Probability of paternity, 0.0%, 0%. Not unlikely or questionable, impossible. I read the report 3 times, checking for errors or misunderstandings. But genetic science doesn't leave room for interpretation. The baby Mara was carrying had been conceived by someone else during the exact window when I'd been too sick to leave our hotel room. The timeline suddenly made perfect sense. Mara's solo exploration of Cancun, her new friendships with executive families, Cedric's unprecedented generosity. The pregnancy wasn't an unexpected blessing, it was a carefully orchestrated deception. I sat in my cubicle, surrounded by the normal sounds of office life, holding proof that my marriage was a performance and my impending fatherhood was a lie. Grant? Neil's voice seemed to come from very far away. You okay? I handed him the report without speaking. His expression shifted from concern to anger as he read the clinical summary of my wife's betrayal. What are you going to do? I don't know yet. You have to confront her. With what? Proof that I secretly tested her genetics because I didn't trust her? That's not exactly the moral high ground. She's carrying another man's baby and letting you believe it's yours. The moral high ground left the building months ago. He was right, but knowing what to do and having the courage to do it were different problems. Confronting Mara meant acknowledging that our entire relationship had become a fiction, that the woman I'd married was capable of deception on a scale that redefined everything I thought I knew about human nature. That evening, I went home to find Mara assembling a crib in what had been our guest bedroom. She looked radiant in the afternoon light, humming softly while she worked with tools that were probably more expensive than my monthly car payment. Cedric sent this over, she said, not looking up from the instruction manual. He said waiting until the 3rd trimester was unnecessary when we could be enjoying the preparation now. That's thoughtful of him. He's been incredibly supportive. I'm lucky to work for someone who cares about his employees' personal lives. Personal lives. The phrase hung between us like a challenge, daring me to ask the questions that would unravel everything. Instead, I helped her assemble furniture for another man's child, pretending to share her excitement while planning my next move in a game I was just beginning to understand. 3 days after receiving the paternity results, I decided to approach the situation like any other investigation. Gather more evidence before confronting the primary suspect. If Mara was capable of this level of deception, she'd probably prepared responses for direct accusations. I needed to understand the scope of the conspiracy before revealing what I knew. The opportunity came when Arielle called to invite me for coffee while Mara was at another client dinner that would keep her out until late evening. Arielle had never invited me anywhere without her sister present, which suggested this conversation had a specific purpose. We met at a cafe in downtown Hartford, the kind of place where artistic types spent entire afternoons nursing single cups of coffee while working on screenplays that would never be produced. Arielle arrived 15 minutes late, wearing clothes that definitely hadn't come from her barista salary. Thanks for meeting me, she said, sliding into the booth across from me. I wanted to talk about Mara and the pregnancy. What about it? How you're handling everything. This must be overwhelming. I studied her face, looking for tells that would indicate how much she knew about the situation. Arielle had always been the more dramatic sister, prone to emotional outbursts and grand gestures, but today she seemed carefully controlled. It's been an adjustment, I said carefully. But we're excited. Are you? Because Mara seems worried that you're not fully supportive. Supportive of what? The pregnancy, the changes, Cedric's help with expenses. There it was. Cedric's name introduced naturally into the conversation, as if his involvement in our family planning was perfectly normal. I'm grateful for his generosity, I lied, though it seems unusual for an employer to be so personally invested. Arielle's expression shifted slightly, a micro-expression that suggested I'd touched on something significant. Cedric isn't just an employer. He's been a mentor to Mara, helping her develop professionally and personally. Some people might misinterpret that relationship. Misinterpret it how? You know how people gossip. Successful man, attractive female employee, generous support. Small minds jump to conclusions. Small minds. As if questioning a boss's unprecedented financial involvement in an employee's pregnancy indicated intellectual limitations rather than basic pattern recognition. What kind of conclusions? Arielle leaned forward, lowering her voice conspirationally. People might think there's something inappropriate about their relationship, but anyone who knows Mara understands how ridiculous that would be. Why ridiculous? Because she's completely devoted to you and your marriage. The pregnancy is proof of that commitment. The pregnancy? Proof of commitment? The irony was so profound I almost laughed. Arielle, can I ask you something directly? Of course. How long have you known about Mara's relationship with Cedric? Her face went very still, the kind of frozen expression people wear when they realize they've walked into a trap. What do you mean? I mean, when did you first become aware that their professional relationship had become personal? I don't know what you're implying. I'm not implying anything. I'm asking a direct question about information you clearly possess. We stared at each other across the cafe table, surrounded by the ambient noise of espresso machines and indie music and conversations between people who weren't discussing the collapse of marriages. You're being paranoid, she said finally. Am I? Or am I finally asking the right questions? Arielle's composure cracked slightly, revealing something harder underneath. Grant, sometimes people find connections they didn't expect. That doesn't make them terrible people. Connections. Emotional support. Understanding. Things that might be missing in other relationships. Are you saying my marriage lacks emotional support and understanding? I'm saying Mara has been lonely. You work constantly, you're emotionally unavailable, you analyze everything instead of just feeling. Some women need more than that. The accusation hit like a physical blow, not because it was entirely wrong, but because it contained enough truth to sting. I did work constantly. I did analyze everything. I had been emotionally distant during the fertility struggles and career pressures of the past 2 years. But emotional distance didn't justify betrayal on this scale. So Cedric provides what I don't? Cedric appreciates Mara's intelligence and ambition. He sees her potential in ways that maybe you don't. And the pregnancy? Arielle's face went completely blank. What about it? Is it part of this emotional connection, this appreciation of her potential? That's a disgusting question. It's a necessary question. The baby is yours, Grant. Mara loves you. This paranoid jealousy is exactly why she needed someone who could support her without constant suspicion. But her denial was too quick, too rehearsed. She'd been prepared for this conversation, which meant she'd known it was coming. How long have you been helping them? Helping them what? Coordinate their relationship, cover for meetings, provide alibis. You're being ridiculous. Arielle, I'm going to ask you one more time, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. How long have you known that Mara and Cedric are having an affair? The question hung between us like a challenge. Arielle's face cycled through several expressions, surprise, anger, calculation, before settling on something that looked almost like relief. 6 months, she said quietly. And you helped them? I helped my sister find happiness. By deceiving her husband? By supporting her choices? Mara deserves someone who appreciates her. Someone who's married to another woman. Someone who makes her feel valued instead of analyzed. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, but the essential truth had been established. Arielle had not only known about the affair, she'd actively facilitated it, providing cover stories and emotional support and moral justification for the betrayal. As I drove home, I realized the conspiracy was larger than I'd imagined. This wasn't a spontaneous affair that had spiraled out of control. It was a coordinated deception involving multiple people, planned and executed with careful attention to detail. The pregnancy wasn't an accident. It was the culmination of a strategy designed to secure Cedric's ongoing support while maintaining the financial security of marriage to me. I was being used as a safety net while my wife built a new life with her lover. That night, I lay awake beside Mara, listening to her breathe while I planned my response to the most comprehensive betrayal I'd ever experienced. The woman sleeping next to me wasn't my wife anymore. She was a stranger wearing a familiar face, carrying another man's child while accepting his money and my ignorance. But now I knew the truth. And knowledge, as any financial analyst understands, is the foundation of all successful strategies. 2 weeks after my conversation with Arielle, Mara announced she was planning a co-ed baby shower for the following Saturday. The event would be held at the country club where Cedric and June were members. Another generous gesture from her increasingly involved boss. June offered to help coordinate everything, Mara said, scrolling through catering menus on her laptop. She has experience with these kinds of events. What kind of events? Elegant gatherings, sophisticated celebrations. She knows how to make things special. Special. The baby shower for another man's child, hosted by his wife, funded by his money, and attended by friends who had no idea they were celebrating an elaborate deception. How many people are we inviting? About 40. Family, friends, some colleagues from both our offices. 40 witnesses to what would either be a lovely afternoon or the most spectacular public revelation of adultery in our social circle's recent memory. The possibility intrigued me more than it should have. I spent the week leading up to the shower making my own preparations. Phone calls to lawyers, documentation of financial irregularities, copies of the paternity test results stored in multiple secure locations. If this situation was going to explode publicly, I wanted to be prepared for the aftermath. The morning of the shower, Mara spent 3 hours getting ready. Hair, makeup, a new dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She looked radiant, glowing with the kind of happiness that comes from believing you've successfully manipulated everyone around you. "You look beautiful," I said, and meant it. Deception suited her. "Thank you. I want everything to be perfect today." Perfect. I wondered what her definition of perfection would be after the afternoon's events concluded. We arrived at the country club to find the private dining room decorated with tasteful elegance. Fresh flowers, designer linens, a gift table that looked like a luxury boutique display. June had indeed created something special. The guests arrived in waves, our friends and family, Mara's colleagues, my parents who'd driven down from Boston specifically for the celebration. Everyone seemed genuinely excited to celebrate our impending parenthood, which made the underlying deception even more disturbing. Cedric arrived fashionably late, playing the role of generous boss with practiced charm. He congratulated me with enthusiastic handshakes and knowing smiles, as if we were sharing some private joke about fatherhood and responsibility. "Grant, the man of the hour," he said, clapping me on the shoulder with false camaraderie. "How are you handling the excitement?" "One day at a time," I replied, "though I appreciate all your support during this process." "My pleasure. Mara is special. You're a lucky man." "Yes, I am." June arrived separately, which seemed odd for a married couple attending the same event. She moved through the room with elegant efficiency, checking details and greeting guests with the kind of social grace that comes from years of practice at corporate functions. When she reached me, her handshake lasted slightly longer than necessary. "Grant, so wonderful to see you again. I hope you're enjoying the celebration." "It's beautiful. Thank you for organizing everything." "My pleasure. Though I should mention, I have something I'd like to discuss with you privately, when you have a moment." Something in her tone suggested this wasn't about catering arrangements or thank you note etiquette. June Calrin struck me as a woman who chose her words carefully and said exactly what she meant. The shower proceeded with traditional efficiency. Games, gift opening, speeches about the joys of parenthood. Mara played her role perfectly, gracious and glowing, and appropriately emotional at all the right moments. Cedric hovered nearby, attentive in ways that might have seemed merely professional to casual observers, but felt intensely personal to anyone paying attention. The way he anticipated her needs, brought her water without being asked, positioned himself within her line of sight at all times. Possessive behavior disguised as thoughtful consideration. Around 3 o'clock, just as Mara was opening the final gifts, June stood up from her table near the back of the room. "Excuse me, everyone. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I have a few announcements to make." The room quieted, guests turning their attention to their elegant hostess with polite curiosity. "First, I want to thank you all for celebrating this special occasion with us today. Pregnancy is such a joyous time, especially when the parentage is clear and celebrated openly." Parentage, an odd word choice that made several people shift uncomfortably in their chairs. "Second, I have some documents to distribute." June reached into her purse and withdrew a manila envelope. "Cedric, darling, these are for you." She walked across the room with measured steps, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor like a countdown timer. When she reached Cedric, she handed him the envelope with a smile that could have frozen champagne. "Divorce papers," she announced to the room. I thought a public venue would be appropriate, given how public your affair has become. The silence that followed was absolute. 40 people sat frozen in their chairs, processing what they'd just witnessed while Cedric's face cycled through shock, anger, and calculation. June, this isn't the place. This is exactly the place. We're better to discuss paternity than a baby shower. She turned to address the room again, her voice carrying the kind of authority that comes from righteous anger and careful preparation. For those who might be confused about the circumstances we're celebrating today, I have some clarifying information. June reached into her purse again and withdrew a second envelope, this one addressed to me. Grant, I believe this belongs to you. I opened the envelope with hands that were steadier than they should have been, given the magnitude of what was happening. Inside were paternity test results. Not mine, but June's own investigation into her husband's recent activities. Probability of paternity, 99.7%. Cedric Trasker was the father of Mara's baby. The room erupted in whispers and gasps as the implications became clear. Mara had gone completely pale, her hands pressed protectively over her stomach as if she could shield the baby from the revelation of its parentage. June, please, Mara started. Oh, please what? Please continue pretending that your pregnancy is a blessed event between you and your husband. Please keep accepting my husband's money for medical bills and nursery furniture while you carry his child. The questions hung in the air like accusations at a trial. Several guests were already reaching for their phones, documenting the spectacle for later distribution among our social circle. Cedric tried to regain control of the situation. Everyone, I think there's been a misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding, June interrupted, was thinking that I wouldn't discover your little arrangement. Did you really believe you could fund your mistress's pregnancy without your wife noticing the financial irregularities? Financial irregularities. June had approached this situation like a forensic accountant, following money trails and documentation until she'd built an undeniable case. I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of 40 pairs of eyes tracking my movement. Thank you, June. This clarifies several questions I've had about the timeline and circumstances. Mara looked at me with something approaching panic. Grant, I can explain. Can you? Because I'd be very interested to hear how you explain carrying another man's child while accepting his financial support and maintaining the pretense of our marriage. The room had become a theater, with our personal catastrophe as the main entertainment. People were filming openly now, capturing the collapse of our marriage for posterity and social media distribution. Cedric made one last attempt at damage control. Grant, this is a private matter that should be discussed. Privately, like the affair, like the pregnancy, like the financial arrangements? I shook my head. I think we've had enough privacy. Transparency seems more appropriate at this point. Mara stood up abruptly, knocking over her chair in the process. I can't do this here, not like this. She moved toward the exit with unsteady steps, one hand pressed to her forehead as if she could physically hold herself together through sheer will. Several guests moved to follow her, but I held up a hand. Let her go. She's had months to prepare for this conversation. A few more minutes won't change anything. The baby shower ended with the kind of awkward efficiency that follows public disasters. Guests gathered their belongings and made hurried exits, already composing the messages they'd send to friends who hadn't witnessed the spectacle firsthand. June approached me as the room emptied. I apologize for the dramatic presentation, but I thought you deserved to know the truth. How long have you known? 3 months. Financial records don't lie, and neither do private investigators. Private investigators? Cedric isn't as careful as he thinks he is. Hotel receipts, restaurant charges, jewelry purchases that didn't come home to me. The pattern was obvious once I started looking. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because I needed to be certain, and because I wanted to document everything before he could destroy the evidence. June handed me a business card for her divorce attorney. You'll need legal representation. Margaret is excellent. She specializes in cases involving adultery and financial deception. I looked around the empty dining room, littered with baby shower decorations and abandoned gifts for a child who would never be mine. What happens now? Now we both figure out how to rebuild our lives without the people who betrayed us. June gathered her purse and walked toward the exit, then paused at the doorway. Grant, for what it's worth, I think you handled this with remarkable dignity. Thank you. Don't let them make you the villain in this story. You're not the one who chose deception over honesty. After she left, I sat alone in the decorated room, surrounded by evidence of a celebration that had become a revelation. The baby gifts would need to be returned, the thank you notes would never be written, and the marriage I'd thought I was building had been exposed as an elaborate performance. But for the first time in months, I knew exactly where I stood. The week following the baby shower felt like living in the aftermath of a natural disaster. News of the revelation spread through our social circle with viral efficiency, helped along by the videos several guests had captured on their phones. By Tuesday, the story had reached our respective workplaces. By Thursday, it was being discussed by people who had never met any of us but enjoyed the spectacle of other people's catastrophes. Mara had moved in with Arielle temporarily, communicating only through lawyers and carefully worded text messages that painted her as the victim of my emotional unavailability and June's vindictive jealousy. The narrative she was constructing bore no resemblance to reality, but it was consistent with the version of events she'd been preparing for months. Cedric had taken a leave of absence from Data Flow Solutions while the board reviewed his conduct. June's divorce proceedings were moving forward with the kind of efficiency that comes from excellent preparation and unlimited legal resources. I spent the week meeting with Margaret Chen, the attorney June had recommended, documenting the financial irregularities and establishing a timeline of deception that would protect me from any claims on assets or support obligations. The paternity test results are definitive, Margaret explained during our third meeting. You have no legal responsibility for the child or any related expenses. The financial arrangements between your wife and her lover are their problem to resolve. What about the house? Joint ownership, but we can argue for your exclusive claim based on the adultery and financial deception. Connecticut courts don't look favorably on spouses who use marital assets to support extramarital relationships. The legal framework was straightforward, but the emotional complexity was harder to navigate. 15 years of marriage doesn't disappear because of betrayal, even betrayal this comprehensive. There were moments when I missed the woman I'd thought Mara was, before I understood how much of our relationship had been performance. On Friday evening, Mara called directly instead of communicating through lawyers. Grant, we need to talk. Our attorneys can handle any necessary communication. This isn't about legal issues. This is about us. There is no us anymore, Mara. Please, just give me 30 minutes to explain everything. I owe you that much. She was right about owing me an explanation, though 30 minutes seemed insufficient to cover the scope of her deception. But curiosity won over caution, and I agreed to meet her at our house, former house, the following evening. She arrived wearing the kind of understated elegance that had first attracted me to her in college, before I understood how carefully she curated every aspect of her appearance. Even 7 months pregnant with another man's child, she was beautiful in ways that made the betrayal more painful. Thank you for seeing me, she said, settling carefully onto the couch where we'd spent countless evenings planning our future together. You have 30 minutes. I know you think I'm a terrible person. I think you're a person who made terrible choices. There's a difference. I never meant for it to happen this way. Which part? The affair, the pregnancy, or the elaborate deception that followed? She was quiet for a moment, staring at her hands folded over her stomach. All of it. None of it was planned. The financial arrangements with Cedric weren't planned? The coordination with Arielle wasn't planned? The timeline that placed conception during my illness wasn't planned? The affair started as emotional support. You were so distant during the fertility treatments, so focused on work and schedules and medical procedures. Cedric listened to me. He made me feel valued. So you decided to have his baby. The pregnancy was an accident, but once it happened, I panicked. I knew the timing would raise questions, so Cedric offered to help maintain the fiction. The fiction of our marriage. The fiction that the baby was yours. I thought if we could get through the pregnancy and early years, maybe we could make it work somehow. Make what work? A marriage built on lies while you raised another man's child with his money? I thought you'd love the baby regardless of genetics. I thought that would be enough. The naivety was breathtaking. She genuinely believed that love could overcome deception on this scale, that I would accept raising Cedric's child while he continued funding our family from the shadows. What about after the baby was born? What was the long-term plan? I don't know. I was hoping we'd figure it out together. Together. While you continued your relationship with Cedric. That was supposed to end after the baby was born. Supposed to end, but it wouldn't have, would it? She didn't answer, which was answer enough. Mara, do you understand what you've done? Not just to me, but to yourself? You've destroyed your marriage, your reputation, your career prospects. For what? A relationship with a married man who was using you as entertainment? He loves me. He loves the excitement of an affair. There's a difference. You don't know him? I know men like him. Powerful, entitled, accustomed to taking what they want without considering the consequences for other people. You think you're special to him? You're a temporary diversion. That's not true. Mara, he's been married for 15 years. He has children, a social position, financial obligations. Did he offer to leave his wife for you? Did he suggest you could build a real life together? Her silence stretched long enough to confirm what I'd suspected. Cedric had never promised her anything beyond financial support and emotional attention. The long-term plan had always been to maintain the status quo, his marriage, her marriage, and their affair continuing indefinitely. "What happens now?" she asked finally. "Now you figure out how to raise his child with whatever support he's willing to provide after his divorce is finalized. I assume June's attorneys will be very interested in his financial obligations to you and the baby." "What about us?" "There is no us. There hasn't been for months, probably longer." "Grant, I know I made mistakes." "Mistakes?" "Mara, you orchestrated an elaborate deception involving multiple people over several months. You let me believe I was going to be a father while you planned to raise another man's child with his money. That's not a mistake. That's a calculated betrayal." She started crying then, the kind of tears that might have moved me 6 months earlier, before I understood how much of her emotional expression was performance. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm so sorry for all of it. I know you are, but sorry doesn't repair this kind of damage. Is there anything I can do? Any way to make this right?" "No. Some things can't be fixed, only ended." She sat quietly for several minutes, absorbing the finality of the situation. "I should go," she said finally. "Yes, you should." She stood carefully, gathering her purse and the dignity she had left. "Grant, for what it's worth, I did love you. I still do." "I know, but love without honesty isn't enough." After she left, I sat in the house we'd shared, surrounded by the remnants of a life we'd built on what I'd thought was mutual trust and shared values. The nursery would need to be converted back to a guest room. The baby clothes would need to be returned. The future we'd planned would need to be completely reimagined. But for the first time since discovering the truth, I felt something approaching peace. The uncertainty was over. The questions had been answered. The performance had ended. I was no longer Grant Solen, expectant father and deceived husband. I was just Grant Solen, a man who'd learned the difference between love and manipulation, between marriage and elaborate fiction. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was honest. And after months of deception, honesty felt like a luxury I'd almost forgotten I could afford. The story ended there, in the quiet of an empty house, with the understanding that some betrayals are so complete they become liberations. Mara would raise Cedric's child with whatever support he provided after his divorce. June would rebuild her life with half his assets and all her dignity intact. And I would start over, older and wiser, and significantly more careful about the difference between generous offers and hidden agendas. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to participate in someone else's deception.